You know, the concept behind this show is preposterous. There's no way a beautiful blonde girl is going to fall in love with a socially inept physicist. I mean, by comparison, this show is only slightly more believable. Hello and welcome back to Physics Not Included, the show that knows in complete and painful detail that Samus Aran is indeed a woman. A vengeful and dangerous woman that should never be confused with a man. Ever. Today we'll be picking up with a point we left off with last time when discussing Samus's gun. Namely, the ice beam. As I said before, the ice beam is a bit of a puzzle in that you can't shoot cold, since cold is not a type of energy, but rather the lack of it. But rather than devote an entire episode once again to Samus's gun, let's take a look at her weapon by looking at another more famous ice-typed weapon. Namely, today we'll be looking at Victor Freeze, more commonly known as Mr. Freeze. Victor Freeze, like so many supervillains, started out life as a seemingly normal individual. Now, although his origins have changed over the years, the best and most well-known story came from Batman, the animated series. A brilliant but socially inept scientist named Victor Freeze was married to a beautiful ballerina named Nora and... Wait a minute, hold the phone. Stop the presses! Why do all these potential supervillain backstories involve the man being involved with some sort of major super hottie? Or in the case of major villainesses, they also happen to be a super hottie? Oh, that's right. It's ONIV. What's ONIV, you ask? ONIV is short for, oops, now I'm villainous. It's the condition where one tragic event turns Mr. Joe Average into Dr. Ultimate Menace, when you think maybe some therapy would have rather helped instead. How does ONIV work? Let's look at some examples. Lex Luthor. Tragic backstory, lost his hair in a lab accident. Result? Swore revenge on Superman, turned evil genius. Victor Von Doom. His face was scarred in a lab accident. He swore revenge on Reed Richards, turned into an evil genius. Syndrome. Was turned down as Mr. Incredible's sidekick. Swore revenge, turned into a treasure troll. In the case of Victor Freeze, his wife became terminally ill. Using GothCorp funds and equipment, Victor put Nora into cryogenic suspension. When his boss found out he was stealing from the company to keep Nora alive, he ordered the plug pulled on Nora. Knowing this would kill his wife, Victor struggled back and was forced into a table holding his own experimental freezing chemicals. Victor was mutated by the experience, his body now unable to survive in temperatures above freezing. This makes Victor Freeze one of the most sympathized with villains in all of comic book lore. His criminal activities were solely geared to gather resources to save the woman he loved, but could now never touch again. Containing himself in a suit that regulated his temperature below freezing and modified his strength to superhuman levels, Freeze equipped himself with a weapon as cold and unemotionless as he wanted people to believe he truly was. The Freeze Ray. The gun fires a visible blue and white beam and freezes targets by encasing them in ice. The weapon is not immediately fatal, as those trapped in it can be thawed out and revived if done so in a timely manner. So what is it about this weapon that makes it so tricky to figure out? Well, let's take a look at the weapon a little more closely. Our first inclination is that the gun may be chemical in nature, spraying two or more compounds at high velocities onto a surface. Once they impact the surfaces, the chemicals can mix, causing a powerful endothermic reaction which would absorb all the ambient heat from the area and freeze it up. This presents several problems in that a chemical weapon would require room within the weapon for the chemicals, and the weapon would need reloading. Note that Mr. Freeze's gun is only slightly bigger than a pistol, and he uses it quite often. In Batman Beyond, the villain Ink crushes one of Mr. Freeze's guns, and there is no sign of a chemical release, just electric sparks. Also, liquids tend to splash when they hit a surface, and the ice effect tends to be very precise and controllable at any distance. Given Mr. Freeze's background as a biologist, a chemical weapon would really be the first way you might think he would go. But it seems that our friend Victor here might have also been a physicist in his spare time, and is instead using thermal transference. The laws of thermodynamics show us that heat will travel from regions of high intensity to regions of low intensity, like if you were to touch a pan directly out of the oven. However, the opposite is never true unless an outside force applies effort onto the heat in order to force it into another area, like, for example, your own freezer in your kitchen. So if Victor's gun is merely moving heat around to freeze objects, then where is the heat flowing to? Look at the vortex pattern of the beam. What we are seeing is not actually a beam traveling outward so much as a heat vacuum. The beam travels out and hits a surface, drawing the heat rapidly up into the weapon, and the surface is frozen over as the water in the air crystallizes. In order to satisfy the laws of thermodynamics, the weapon would have to both be able to shed its own heat and the heat it had absorbed from another surface. The most straightforward way would be able to use the heat and help power the gun, partially keeping the gun at full capacity. So how does this help us with the problem of Samus's gun? Well, at this point, I'm almost kind of willing to say it works because it's Samus, and I don't want to get shot at again. However, the effect is rather temporary, and you can still kill enemies with it, so I think I've got it figured out. The cannon arm starts by creating a zone of super cold, and then wraps it in a field of standard blaster energy. The blast effect is weaker than normal, so it can freeze without killing. When it strikes, the cold saps the thermal energy of the target. In part, the foe is stunned by the sudden shock, but is also coated in ice by the rapid exchange of heat. In short, it acts a little bit like an energy water balloon. So there you have it, folks. We solved the problem of a hero by looking at the problem of a villain. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got some villains to say to myself. Namely the crooks that work at the insurance company who refuse payments to the repairs on my lab. I know for a fact I was paying for policies on fire, flood, earthquake, volcano, acts of superheroism, acts of supervillainy, acts of irate ex-girlfriend, cross-dimensional time rifts, and lab explosions. Now, I got out unscathed when Samus attacked, but my place was trashed all to pieces. There was this one room in the back with its door hanging off of its hinges, and it said, "Do not open. Contents may cause Armageddon." Well, the room was empty, of course, but that's not important right now. What's important is that this was physics not included. I'm Theorne. Keep the questions rolling in, and we'll see you next time.
I failed you. I wish there were another way for me to say it. I cannot. I can only beg your forgiveness and pray you'll hear me somehow. Someplace where a warm hand waits for mine.